Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that 1832 account. I'm going to hit the four major accounts with you. There's an 1832, 35, 38, and 42 account. These accounts are ones that Joseph either produced or he oversaw their production. Therefore, they're known as the first-hand accounts of the first vision. This is the earliest known one, is 1832. It's written, the only one that we have in Joseph Smith's own handwriting. In this account, Joseph focuses more than anything on his quest to have his sins forgiven. There is this common campfire, second great awakening preaching that you have to find out if God has chosen you. Don't upset God. You know, what's the status of your soul? Are you saved? Do you know? Those questions seem to be burning and settling on Joseph. And he says in this account that he felt convicted because of his own sins and that he wanted to know if his sins were forgiven. And that was one of the driving factors that took Joseph Smith to the grove. He says that he cried unto the Lord for mercy, for there was none else to whom I could go to obtain mercy. And the Lord heard my cry in the wilderness, while in the attitude of calling upon the Lord in the 16th year of my age. Now, that 16th year, some people look at it and say, oh, I thought he was 14. Well, by 16th year, he likely means he was 15 years old. And that was actually an insert added by Frederick G. Williams. So it's possible that maybe Joseph misremembered his age by 1 year, or that Frederick G. Williams misremembered Joseph's age of being 14 for 1 year. Again, one other part of the 1832 account that I love is that Joseph says that this question about his soul began to settle in on him when he was 12. Sometimes we tell the first vision story like, there was a young boy named Joseph who was confused over which church he should join. So he opened up James 1:5 that said, ask of God. So he put the book down and walked into a grove of trees and prayed, and God appeared to him. And he came back and he didn't even miss breakfast. While that condensed version might be helpful sometimes, it could also send this wrong message. Joseph seems to tell us that it took him years of searching, years of pondering, years of thinking before the vision came. Quote, at the age of 12 years, my mind became seriously impressed with regard to the all-important concern for the welfare of my immortal soul, is what he says. I pondered many things concerning the situation. Now, that's instructive to me because it shows me that sometimes answers don't come. They don't come for me right away. They might not come for you right away. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they take years. And it apparently took Joseph years here. It's also instructive because what 12-year-old says, I was concerned with the all-important welfare of my soul. You guys don't want to know what I was concerned about when I was 12 years old. It definitely wasn't that, to show the greatness of Joseph Smith's young soul as a whole. And as I mentioned again, he's also very concerned over his sins. He says, quote, I became convicted of my sins. I felt to mourn for my sins. The first thing he reports the Lord saying to him is, Joseph, my son, thy sins are forgiven thee. What a wonderful message, that one of the first messages of this dispensation to a young Joseph was that God forgives sins. And I bear my witness that he does. Also in the first vision, perhaps only one being is mentioned. Joseph says, and I'll talk about this and touch on it, a pillar of fire or light above the brightness of the sun at noonday came down from above and rested upon me, and I was filled with the Spirit of God. And the Lord opened the heavens unto me, and I saw the Lord. Now, it depends on Joseph's purpose here, on why he's not using this as a theological discourse on the Trinity, by the way, or the separate nature of the Father and the Son. He's simply saying that the Lord opened the heavens. He saw God, and that he spoke with God as a whole. Some people have even tried to say he is saying two beings there. The Lord opened the heavens, and I saw the Lord. It's hard to say. Some critics have tried to make mileage of that. In every other account, Joseph is very consistent that there are two beings. And as I'll talk about a little bit later, those two beings did not appear at the same time. I do think it is consistent that one being appeared to him first. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk first about the 1835 account. The 1835 account was given to a man named Robert Matthews, who fancied himself kind of like a Jewish prophet. He turns out to be a little bit more of a shady character than that, perhaps even wanted for murder. And after Joseph has him stay the night in his house, he finds out some details about him and then asks him to leave. So it's a little bit sketchy in our history, but from it we get a great first vision account as Joseph tells Robert Matthews about Joseph's own visions as a whole. In this one, he's going to emphasize some things, particularly the adversarial attack and some post details. He gives a good postscript from it. So let's talk about a few of them. In this one, Joseph gives us the most vivid description about the attack that happens to him. He hears, as he's calling, he hears a noise behind him. He says, I made a fruitless attempt to pray. My tongue seemed swollen in my mouth so that I could not utter. I heard a noise behind me like a person walking towards me. Strove again to pray, but could not. The noise of walking seemed to draw near. I sprung up on my feet. Some of you might remember this earliest church history video that shows this. They're drawing on this 1835 account where they're getting these details. Now, I mentioned this that's interesting, and one of the things I study is how we use art, and I'll talk about this as I show my own painting. We typically show the Father and the Son standing side by side, coming out of the pillar of light together, but that's actually not what the accounts say happened. Multiple accounts suggest that one being appeared to Joseph Smith, and then another being appeared. In the 1835 account, he says, a personage appeared in the midst of this pillar of flame, which was spread all around. By the way, did you catch in the 1832 account that he first wrote, I saw a pillar of fire, then crossed it out and wrote light. Back to this, spread all around, and yet nothing consumed. Another personage soon appeared like the first. He said to me, thy sins are forgiven thee. Really fascinating. And by the way, that's supported by at least two of the other secondary accounts. In 1843, David Nye White wrote, quote, directly I saw a light, and then a glorious personage in the light, and then another personage. To Alexander Nybar, who wrote this down, Nybar said that when he sees the being that appeared to him, after a while, another soon came to the side of the first. That's interesting to consider Joseph speaking to one being, and then after a while, or shortly thereafter, another being appeared. He also leaves this wonderful postscript in the 1835 account. He says, and I saw many angels in this vision. Wouldn't it be wonderful this vision is probably greater than we suppose of the Father and the Son, as though that's not great enough. But there was apparently a concourse of angels. Imagine that in your mind as well. And we're starting to see that in some art being produced today. All right, the 1838 account is probably the account that you know best. The reason why is because this account is what is published in the official history of the church. It's in church newspapers. And then it gets picked up by Franklin D. Richards when he's a mission president over in England and put into this little pamphlet called the Pearl of Great Price. The Pearl of Great Price will soon become very popular over here in America as well with the church. And in 1880, it will be canonized, which is a big deal because that gives the average member of the church access to a printed version of the first vision for the first time. Then it starts to become cited and quoted and more well-known as a whole. Because of that, the 1838 account, it being in the Pearl of Great Price, it's the one that we know the best. Well, what's unique about it? Well, first of all, remember, this is the official history of the church. It gives us the most details about the rise of the church and in the context of the church. It gives us the most details about what happened before the vision and what happened after the vision. As I already mentioned, it probably has the most persecution details as well, because in 1838, the church is suffering from a lot of persecution. We get details like Joseph attending before all the meetings and the conflict that was going on in his mind. We get some wonderful details after, like that Joseph was lying on his back and that he had no strength, the discussion with his mother, that Presbyterianism is not true, the condemnation from one of the local Methodist preachers who tells him with great contempt that it's all of the devil. You get these wonderful, wonderful details in the 1838 account. The 1842 account was written by Joseph Smith to a newspaper man when we got to Illinois. So when the church starts to set up in Nauvoo, there's a newspaper man who writes a newspaper up in Chicago called the Chicago Democrat. His name's John Wentworth, and he wants to know just who are these Mormons that have come into Illinois. So Joseph writes him a letter giving a sketch of the rise of the church, and in it he includes a First Vision account.